and welcome to another episode of Through My Eyes. So, what exactly can you see? I and a lot of other blind people get that question quite often. And what's our response to such a benign question? Do you have a few days? Now, we're not saying that to be malicious or anything like that. We're actually speaking the truth. Now, totally blind people, I'm talking black blind, no light perception or anything, actually, ironically, have it easier when it comes to answering this question, because they can say, I can't see a thing. But for those of us, including myself, with what we call usable vision, in other words, with some vision remaining that we can actually use day to day, the question becomes a lot more complex, because our vision is very case dependent. In other words, it can change depending on the lighting conditions, the environment we're in, and it's also very complex. There, are usually quite a few things we can see and quite a few limitations to what we can see, and in varying degrees and varying types and all of this. So, I'm going to attempt, at least in my case, to explain as precisely as I can what I can and cannot see. Now, hopefully this won't take a couple days. But it's going to take a little time. And for some of you, it might be a little bit talky. I'm warning you now, this podcast might be a little bit boring in the sense that there's not a lot visually going on. But I'm going to try to alleviate that to some extent throughout the podcast by showing you some pictures and stuff. So, just be aware of that. And, to kind of give you a bit of behind the scenes, excuse me, because my vision is so complicated and there's so much to it, I'm actually having to use notes this time when I do this podcast. Usually I'm pretty on the fly about it, pretty informal and all that, but so that I don't forget anything, I'm actually having to use notes this time, so we shall see how that goes. So, to kind of give you a description of, first of all, the technical aspects of my visual condition, I have officially been diagnosed with, number 1, Leber's congenital amaurosis, number 2, optic atrophy, number 3, color deficiency, and number 4, Eales disease. So these are 4 different conditions I've been diagnosed with on top of each other. And now, as I say, most people with low vision, with usable vision and low vision, have very quirky vision. Now, mine may be a little more quirky than most, I don't know, maybe a little less. But with all 4 conditions on top of each other, it certainly makes for some unique vision on my part. Now, I mentioned low vision, usable vision. People with low vision are just by nature going to have what's called usable vision. And I hope I've kind of explained that, what usable vision is enough already. So now to get back to my visual conditions, to kind of explain them in more detail, Leber's congenital amaurosis, my first that I mentioned, is where I have a full complement of retinal cells, but many of them are not formed properly. So this can affect, for instance, how light enters into my eye. Optic atrophy is where my optic nerve, as I understand it, is thinner and smaller than it should be. It's there, but it's very thin and very small. It's barely detectable by some ophthalmologists that I've gotten to. It's that thin and small, in my case anyway. Now, in some other cases, perhaps the optic nerve is larger than that. Again, I'm not a doctor, I haven't really studied these things thoroughly. This is just what I know as a layperson. Number 3, color deficiency. That basically means I can see all the colors, that are in this world, but I don't necessarily get them right on. So, say if I'm looking at something that's pink, I might see it as orange. If I'm looking at something that's red, I might see it as pink. If I'm looking at something that's blue-green, I might see it as blue, because for me the blue's dominating, and so I see it as blue rather than blue-green. And there's my phone. Anyway, ignore that. Yeah, totally an amateur podcast, guys, I know. And so, Eales disease. Number 4. this basically means that blood vessels have randomly started growing around the macula of my eye. Now, one night actually, I was sitting watching Jeopardy, and all of a sudden I see this pink dot in the center of my right eye, and I try rubbing, and I think there's something in my eye. I can't get it out. The dot expands and eventually covers all of my right eye, and same thing eventually happens to my left eye, and before you know it, I'm taken to a hospital. Well, eventually I went to see a Harvard-trained retinal specialist about it. Oh, crap, that phone. Anyway, went to see a retinal specialist about it, and he couldn't figure out what was causing it. I was checked for diabetes. I didn't have diabetes. Usually the blood vessel thing usually happens with diabetics. And so he basically had to look through a bunch of medical literature and had to eliminate everything and just came up with the diagnosis of Ehlers disease. Interestingly enough, Ehlers disease typically occurs in non-Caucasians. Now, I do have Native American on my mom's side and some Mongolian on my dad's side, but other than that, I'm pretty darn white. So, now, the color deficiency for a minute, that typically occurs in males. No comments, people. But, again, these are my quirky eyes. As I mentioned in an audio boo I did, my eyes are very quirky in a lot of ways, and you'll come to see that more and more throughout this podcast. Some other aspects of my vision, I'm not sure what these are related to, what particular aspect of my condition, but a while back I got my wisdom teeth out, went under anesthesia, and after that my eyes started dimming a lot more than they already were. Now, Leber's, because of apparently poor circulation, causes some dimming in your vision, and actually that progresses over time in most cases. But for me, the dimming really got severe after I came out of the anesthesia. So I don't know if it's related to that or if that's just how my Leber's progressed. But that happens with my eyes are a lot dimmer than they used to be. My vision is a lot dimmer than it used to be. Also, my vision nowadays tends to get a little dimmer, a little brighter from day to day. Now, it's not a big difference, so it's actually manageable, and it's not something I really pay attention to, but that does happen. Excuse me. So now let's get into the more functional aspect of my vision. What does all this mean? What can and can I not see from day to day? Let's start out by talking about pictures. Both, two-dimensional, like in a photograph or painting, or three-dimensional, as in physical environments. So I'm looking out on a physical environment. Now, I may be able to see physically, in either a physical environment or a picture, I may be able to see all of the lines, all of the colors, all of the shapes. Things may be sufficiently big, magnified, whatnot, for me to be able to see them. Be able to see all that. But my brain cannot put all of those colors and lines and images together into a picture that I can understand. To me, it just looks like a bunch of lines, a bunch of colors, a bunch of shapes. My brain can't put all that together into an image. It's basically like looking at an abstract painting. Now, this most often happens when a picture or an environment is very complex. A lot going on, real busy, Although there are some other cases where even simple pictures or environments can be difficult. So, as I say, it looks like an abstract painting to me. And complexity is a factor. Now, in pictures, I can sometimes pick out very commonly recognizable objects, probably because I've seen them so often. Such as faces. As I understand psychology, faces are kind of inborn into us being able to recognize those, so that might have something to do with it too. But things like basic chairs, basic table shapes. Now, if the chair gets complex and really intricate in terms of its design, or the table is not shaped like your typical table, or even very slightly from what I consider your typical table or chair, what the archetype, if you will, in my mind is of the table or chair, I might not be able to recognize it. It may, again, become a bunch of lines and colors, blend into everything else, and look like, all that looks like an abstract painting to me. So, I'm going to show you in a minute some pictures and sort of as examples of what I'm talking about. So, I'm going to switch back to my camera so I can see what I'm doing and bring up a picture of my iPhone. Now, I hope you guys can see this, but we'll do our best. Again, I'm not skilled in video editing at this point. I would like to be at some point, but I'm not there right now. So we'll have to deal with it as it comes. Let's see when this picture was taken. September 29th, 2013, in the evening. And so I have some idea of what it might be, just based on that context. You know, it's good that these photos actually give you a context as to when and where they were taken. So that helps. But I'm going to show you the picture. See if you can see this. Okay. So there it is. Again, I'm not sure exactly how much you can see, but to me, there looks like there's some kind of sign in the sort of the middle of the picture. I don't know if it says India. It's hard for me to tell what it says. That's actually kind of small, but it looks like there's white letters, maybe on a black background, sort of a black strip. Now at the bottom of the picture, at first when I looked at it, I could see, oh, there's some kind of roundy things, several, maybe 3 of them. When I looked closer, I saw it looked like there was maybe a person there in the center. Looks like maybe a hat on him. And to the left and the right of him, it looks like those might be other, I'm guessing those may be other people as well, just, you know, based on the context and what other things I can sort of determine from that picture. Now, obviously this picture is on my iPhone, but I cannot remember who took it or when it was, or you know, what it was that person took. So, that's why I can't interpret it anymore, because, you know, in a lot of cases, if I know what the picture is ahead of time, I can say, oh, this is that in that picture, or this is a head in the picture, or this is a sign in that picture, or whatever, you know, if I knew what it was. I could point those things out, but if I don't know what they are, or if I don't have them described to me what the picture is, I can't tell you much about the picture, okay? So now if you give me a minute, I'm going to select another picture really quickly. It's going to take a bit for me to get there. Now this next picture is actually going to demonstrate to you how I can recognize some things in a picture that are common, and then I kind of have to deduce others. Once I find that. Okay, this was taken on November 28, 2013, which, as I recall, was either Thanksgiving or close to Thanksgiving. So I'm going to show you, after I get a look at it myself, I'm going to show you the picture. Alright, so again, I'm not sure how well you can see it, but here it is. Now, again, I can surmise this is close to Thanksgiving, so it might be a Thanksgiving picture, and I examine it more closely. That one thing in the center looks like one of our dining room chairs, again, thinking maybe it's something to do with Thanksgiving. If I didn't know the context, I might not have been able to tell you that. And so I'm looking below the chair. I presume a table is likely to be below that little part of the chair there. And so I'm presuming that's a table. And I'm looking in the center of the table. Looks like there's something round, so I assume that's a plate. Looks like there may be meat in the center, so I assume that's our turkey. Okay? Again, I'm pretty sure that's what it is because I remember taking that picture. And it's close to that date, Thanksgiving, if not on that day. And so I presume that's our Thanksgiving turkey sitting there. Okay? So, there you are. That's how I can deduce. And like I said, sometimes I'll remember exactly when I took a picture, exactly what was in it, and where it was in the picture. And so I can tell you exactly what this and this and this is. So, there you have it. Now, moving pictures, movies, whatever, TV shows and whatnot, if there's a lot of action going on, my eyes can't follow that very well either. So, if there's, say, a fight scene going on, I might know from like context and maybe sounds of swords or guns or whatever going off, that there's a fight going on, but I can't tell exactly what the moves are. All I can tell you is there's a fight going on and I see a bunch of quick motion. And I'm not even going to tell you whether there are people in the scene or what part of the person I'm looking at. Again, just a bunch of lines and colors. Lines and colors moving around on the screen. And so, like I said, even movies can be a little difficult in terms of determining what's going on and what's in the picture. So, alright. Again, this is probably related to my optic atrophy, because my brain is not able to receive and process properly all the information because of my thinner and smaller optic nerve. Again, I'm not a doctor, but that's my own little theory. Alright, and my vision, by the way, is also very centralized. In other words, what I can see the best is in the center of my vision. My peripheral vision is very limited compared to my central vision. I can see some light, I can see a little bit of color, I can see some hints of objects in my periphery, but that's about it. My visual field, for those of you who know the numbers, is about 30 degrees. Again, just take it from me, that's very narrow. Now, because of my Eales disease, I had to have some laser surgery to cauterize those blood vessels so they wouldn't be leaking anymore. And so, unfortunately, a necessary, if you will, result or necessary evil of that was that it took my peripheral vision even further. So actually, I used to have a lot more peripheral than I do now. And so, because my visual field is so narrow, I tend to look, when I'm navigating, say, in a room or a street or whatever, I tend to try to look as far out in front of me as I can to be able to encompass as much information as I can in order to be able to see as much as I can in that narrow field. Now, I mentioned, I think before, that I do use a white cane, even with the vision that I have, which, by the way, a lot of Leber's people really do not have nearly the vision that I have. My retinal specialist, again, Harvard trained, when he evaluated me to make sure I had Leber's, again, when I was dealing with the Eales disease situation, is amazed at what I can see, because apparently when I had electrodes attached to my head and I was getting a light flash in front of my eyes, I basically flatline the machine. Even though I'm seeing what I can see, I flatline the machine. So again, now, I got on a bit of spiritual tangent, but my mom, apparently, when she realized I was going to be blind, prayed that I could at least have enough vision to see a flower. And, I mean, I do have that. And a lot of people can't explain that, so I know of maybe only one other person with Leber's that has the vision that I do, and he actually went up to the same school I did. Anyway, no tangent there, but, so getting back to my functional vision, even if my eyes, this is another one of these weird situations, seeing versus my brain perceiving, but even if my eyes can see something physically, even if it's registering on my eye, my brain may not even know it's there. So if there's like I don't know, an obstacle or something in front of me, I don't know, a pole or something, I may be looking straight at it, my eyes apparently are seeing it, but my brain doesn't always register it's there. So it might just be completely invisible to my brain, to my perception. And so that's one reason that I use a cane. In case something's in front of me, my brain doesn't pick up on, and my cane will pick up on it, no, there's something there. And again, because of my limited field also, when I'm looking straight ahead, I can't see very well what's below me, above me, or to the side. And, so that's again why I also use a cane. Now, obviously, using a white cane, standard white cane, is not going to pick up things that are in front of my face or above me, and that's where, believe it or not, there are laser canes out there that exist that emit a laser beam in front of you and around you that will, I think through vibration, will tell you what's in front of you and above you. Now, I don't really have the need for that because I don't encounter situations where I that often, have something that's in front of me or above me that my cane's not going to detect below at my feet. And so I don't use them, but I know at least one person who does. The size of the object that I may or may not notice, it doesn't seem to matter what size it is. So there you have it. Alright, and so just to kind of give you a basic idea of my visual acuity numbers, my vision with correction is 20/200, believe it or not. For those of you who know what I'm talking about. My vision without correction is 20/400. And again, that to those of you in the know, probably seems like a decent amount of vision, for considering my condition. But as I've demonstrated up to this point, it's not just about the numbers. My functional vision is actually a lot more complicated and a lot less usable than it would be if you're just considering the numbers, right? So, there you have it. Now, to give you an idea of how I read, say a computer, or just generally I read page of print, I do read large print, and I also read Braille. I'm kind of in between that, where sometimes Braille is better for me and sometimes large print is better for me, and let me kind of explain what I mean. I read about 5 times magnification on a computer screen. Think back to the episode where I demonstrated my CCTV. You can see that a couple of episodes back if you want to look at that. It's about 5 times magnification on a computer screen. I also use, on my computer, I use speech. Now I use a program I think I mentioned before called ZoomText, which actually magnifies my computer to where, to where things are big enough for me to see. That's actually how I'm reading my notes right now on a computer screen. I have it up in a file in front of me. And so that's why you probably notice I'm not looking directly at the camera, because I'm actually reading notes on my computer. And so the ZoomText has magnification, but it also has speech. So I use speech mainly to be able to read more quickly. I mentioned earlier my limited visual field. Well, when I'm reading standard or even in large print, that means for me, in my case, because it's so narrow, that I can only see maybe 2 or 3 letters at a time on one line. And so I can't anticipate what's coming ahead. I can't tell you what was before it. I can't see what was in the above line or the line below it. And so that actually decreases my reading speed considerably. And so a lot of times if I'm going to give a presentation, I will memorize quite a bit of what I'm going to say before I give a presentation, like with this one. And you notice before now, I'd kind of pause a little bit and like a couple of ums in there as I was reading ahead on my notes. And so that's why when I can, I use audio, I use speech. I'm not doing that here because I don't want to stick headphones on me and it looks really bad in the podcast like this. So yeah, I'm actually reading. But generally I use speech to speed up my reading. And it can be problematic when I'm giving presentations if I am a little slow on it, because people, automatically associate my slow reading with having some kind of mental difficulty or something like that, whereas it really isn't. I can read just like anyone else in terms of pronouncing the words and understanding, but it's just my limited visual field. And like I said, I do what I can to compensate for that. But you can't always, be perfect with it. Now, interestingly enough, and I'll kind of come back to this at a later point in the podcast also, but interestingly enough, I consider myself a visual thinker trapped inside a blind person's body. So, when I can read, when I'm afforded the luxury of visually reading something, I prefer to read it visually rather than hearing it, because I tend to be able to acquire more information that way. I comprehend more reading visually than I do auditorily, which again seems counterintuitive, but it's true. Now with the iPhone, I think some of you just heard me doing this. With the iPhone, I use speech. Totally use speech. I don't use magnification because I need the magnification so big that when I'm trying to read across and scrolling across the screen with my finger interferes with my reading. And so it's just not practical for me to use the magnification that's built into the iPhone. So I use speech on there. Now, when I'm visually reading, I actually prefer a very high contrast. So, excuse me, I prefer very bright white text on a very dark black background, as much contrast as you can get. Because for me, just reading the standard black text on a white background, the white background creates a lot of interference for me visually. A lot of glare, if you will, onto the black text or onto whatever color text that I'm reading, and makes it a lot slower and a lot more difficult for me to read. And so, of course, white text on a black background isn't typically available in regular paper format. And so whatever I can get online or on the computer, you know, that's better for me. Because my zoom text allows me not only to magnify print, but it also allows me to change the contrast. So I have white text on a black background. And so there you have it. Now, a lot of sighted people, that white on black, especially that bright, drives them out of their mind. Probably because their vision is brighter than mine. And so a lot of them say it hurts their eyes to read that. But again, because my vision is so dim, it doesn't seem to affect me at all. Now, kind of let's touch back on, let's get back a little bit to room navigation. Say I'm in a physical environment and I'm not familiar with it at all. Now, my ability to navigate that room depends, as I mentioned earlier, on the complexity of that room. So if it's really complex, I'll use a cane to navigate that. And of course, also with the issue with my brain not noticing stuff, I almost use a cane almost always in an unfamiliar environment because of those two factors. Now, again, unfamiliar environment, very, very difficult in most cases. Now, if I'm familiar with an environment, if I've memorized where things are, if I know what's in a room, you know, if they haven't changed something, changed stuff around or whatever since I've last been there, you know, I can navigate it easily and often without a cane, certainly in my own home. I never use a cane walking around here because I'm so familiar with where everything is. I can walk around without lights on. You know, a lot of sighted people are like, you know, when they're around blind folk, they don't necessarily need lights. We don't always turn them on, and they're like, turn the lights. Oftentimes we forget about it. So, but as I say, a lot of times, you know, if I've memorized a room, it's not as big of an issue. Now let me kind of discuss some rather quirky things about my vision that don't really fit in any particular category. Now, as you can tell, I do wear glasses, and in recent years, I do need a stronger prescription because of the natural aging and natural deterioration of my vision due to Leber's, and probably the other conditions as well. But when I've tried to get a stronger prescription, for some reason, my eyes tend to cross on me. So any lens I've tried that's been stronger, my eyes cross like crazy, and I cannot deal with that. And the way my eyes are so quirky, I never know what they're going to do. I have not gotten a stronger prescription because of that. You know, I don't want to take the chance on my eyes. Maybe I'm completely off on this, but I don't want to take the chance of my eyes crossing and staying that way, frankly. I don't know if that's possible, but I just don't want to have to deal with that, so I have not been able to get a new prescription. Now, another interesting aspect of my vision that I mentioned on an audio boo that I did before this podcast, that actually inspired this podcast, is I love the very deep cerulean color that the sky gets on a crisp autumn day. But when I look up into the sky, I can't look up there into that cerulean blue for more than a couple seconds, or else my eyes feel like they are being seared off. They hurt. Now, I don't know if this is common with other people with low vision. I've heard of maybe a couple of other cases of it, and some other folks have that issue with other neon colors. I don't think I have that so much with other neon colors, but certainly with a blue sky. And let me kind of give you an example of what type of blue sky I'm talking about, because I'm sure you're curious, and I also want to break the monotony of me talking. So, now this is a picture I took right directly above me. Again, I don't know how well you can see this, but I took this right above me. There we are. About like, okay, there we are. I took this right above me when the sky was really clear again. It was sort of an autumn, one of those autumn days, real clear days. You can see the very deep blue. I mean, it was one of the deepest blue skies I'd seen, and I actually use this as my iPod wallpaper. So I can look at it in a photo just fine, it doesn't hurt my eyes, but if I'm actually looking at it in the sky, it kills them, which is sad because I love that color. So, there you have that. Alright. So, now, because my vision is so case dependent, a lot of people wonder, okay, so how do I deal with her and her vision in this situation or that situation if it's so case dependent and I really don't know what she can and can't see from one moment to the next? Well, what I recommend is, guys, you're not going to insult my intelligence if you you do this, but assume that I can't see something. Just go ahead and assume, oh, she can't see X, Y, or Z, and so I'm going to describe it to her. Even if I can, my intelligence isn't going to be insulted. I know that my vision is very complex, and so just assume that I can't see something if you have any doubt or any question. Now, I don't know about other blind people on this subject, other low vision folks, how they react, but for me, it's not a big deal. So, now, I mentioned that I have been diagnosed with several conditions, one on top of the other, and that my eyes also demonstrate some very quirky things that don't seem to fit in any particular condition. They don't seem to fit any category. Because Ehlers disease is not typically connected with Leber's, remember the blood vessel thing I mentioned? That's not typically connected with my Leber's condition that I also have. My retinal specialist actually wound up putting my eyes, pictures of my eyes, in a medical journal with descriptions of what was going on. Now, I didn't have a name with it or anything, so they're anonymous, but my eyes are officially in a medical journal. Now, because of all these quirky things about my eyes and all these conditions, a lot of times I've wondered whether I don't have some kind of new genetic mutation, something completely new, because my vision is just so peculiar that, you know, I often wonder if I wasn't misdiagnosed and if this is something completely different. But anyway, some things that I can do with low vision that you might not expect of me are the fact that, as I mentioned earlier a couple of times, I can take pictures. If conditions are optimal, and if I know what I'm taking, again, getting back to the picture issue, and the lighting issue, if the lighting is good, if I know what I'm taking a picture of, if I can make heads or tails of it, you know, the physical thing I'm taking a picture of, then it's great. If I'm in a really bright, outdoorsy environment, a lot of times I can't see well enough to take a picture. But in those cases, I usually guess as to where the thing is that I'm wanting to take. You know, I can see the physical object, but when it comes to taking the picture, it can be difficult, and so I put the camera close to where I think the object is, take the picture, and then look later to see if it's accurate. In many cases, it's very accurate. I'm not always centered. The object isn't always centered, but it's usually very close to centered. Also, there's the issue of balance. Physical balance. Now, I've always been very able to balance very well. So, there was a bit of a story I want to tell. One time I was very young, and I was swinging, and I decided at the top of the arc, if you will, of the swing, to jump off of that swing and land close to a bush that was out in front of me. And so I jump off that swing, and I land right on my feet. There was another time when I was riding on one of those snow saucer things, like those sleds that saucer things that move around in random directions, and I happened to hit a hard object, I don't even know what it was, under the snow. I flew up several feet, but was able to land, frankly, on my rear, sitting straight up. Didn't break a bone or anything. A lot of people think that balance is very visual. As I understand it, it's actually very auditory, in the sense that the fluids in the ear actually are largely what control balance. So it would make sense that my balance because I'm more aware of what what I'm hearing, and all of that, more conscious of my ears perhaps. It would make sense that my balance is quite good. I've never broken a bone, knock on wood. This isn't wood, but close enough, in my life. So, another thing that's interesting about my ability to function with low vision is my spatial sense. As I said, visual mind, blind body. In school, I always hated mathematics. I was never good at it, except for geometry. Now, if the pictures were explained to me, they were big enough, they weren't complex, I loved geometry. I always made straight A's in geometry because I have a spatial sense, very good spatial sense. And a lot of people with my condition, that is Leber's, that condition, are the same way. A lot of other blind people have problems with spatial things, as you might expect, spatial sense. But people with Leber's seem to have a good spatial sense, particularly those who are intellectually above average. With Leber's, as I understand it, you're either intellectually slower or you're intellectually above average in most cases. And so usually the spatial sense comes, as I understand it, with the latter case. There was one time, just to give an example of my spatial sense in a physical environment, there was one time that I was in a department store, and my mom had lost track of my dad. I was actually pretty little at the time. But I had this sense, just based on how we'd walked and the directions we'd turned and such, I had this sense of where we left him. So I said, let me see if I can find him. And interestingly enough, she took me up on it. And so I was able to retrace all the turns that we'd made and was able to locate him. Again, very spatially sensitive to things. I sort of draw a mental picture in my mind as to where we're going, where we've been. Now, I'm not sure if all Leber's people do that. Like I said, a lot of other Leber's folks have a very much more limited vision than I do. But for me, I draw a mental image in my mind about how things are arranged. Alright. Now, me describing all these things, you might think it's kind of a downer for me to be describing all of these things and that I'm all depressed about it and blah blah blah. Well, for one thing, I've lived with it all my life. And so it's not as big a deal for me as it might be for someone who has recently lost their vision or lost it later in life. To me, it's actually rather academically interesting. And so it's actually fascinating for me to describe my vision. Now, I hope these explanations are clear to you guys, all these explanations, because as someone who's had limited vision all of her life, I don't, as a person with who's had limited vision, I don't know necessarily what people with full sight can see. So I don't have a really good reference point to work from. So again, I hope I've explained things to folks, and I hope you guys understand. Now, if you have any questions about this or anything else I've done in my podcast, as usual, feel free to leave them in the comments, or if you follow me on Twitter, ask them on Twitter. The next time I do a question time, if you will, I will answer them. So now, in terms of knowing what people can and can't see, getting back to that, I have some idea of what better vision is, as I mentioned before, because my vision has deteriorated over time to some extent. I used to, for instance, be able to see the those standard large print textbooks that low vision kids got in school years ago with the beige background and the maybe twice or three times magnified print. I used to be able to see those. Now it's a lot more of a strain. Again, I need the very high contrast, black text, white background. As I recall, I think I was even able to read with greater ease when I was younger, standard white paper with black text. But again, that's changed quite a bit now. And so I think that just about covers it. Again, if you have any questions, let me know, and I hope this has been somewhat informative, and I hope it wasn't too boring, me just sitting here talking. Next podcast, if I can, I'm going to try to make it a little more involved, exciting, more visually stuff going on there. But again, hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will talk to you next time. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Through My Eyes. Bye, guys.